I'm also running errands. I'm being a dad. I'm touching grass. I'm getting some vitamin D, these other things I feel like when you do this full time that are very, very important. So you're not just sitting here staring at charts 12 hours a day.
Nick for a Tick is here with us. Order Flow Lab guys. What time frames do you like to trade?
So I'm usually a New York Open to the kind of the Euro close hour. I just like the speed that occurs slightly after the open during initial balance. It just fits a lot of what I look for as far as setups. We do tend to abide by various MGI levels, and the market just kind of behaves in a normal setting in a way where a lot of that end of the day order flow can be a little wonky at times. You see a lot of repositioning, you see options kind of can move the market at times. So sometimes I don't love sitting in there towards the end of the day to take trades. I like the speed. The same reason why I am just one of the worst Globex traders probably on YouTube. It's just too slow. I tend to oversize. It's just not my time of the evening in a way to execute trades and be successful. So I've matured in knowing where my P&L tends to stay green. And it's kind of that good 2 hours between New York Open and the typical Euro close. Plus, when you do this full time, you learn to not only trade when you're the most effective, but also how can you fill those other hours of the day. And yes, I'm also running errands. I'm being a dad. I'm touching grass. I'm getting some vitamin D, these other things I feel like when you do this full time that are very, very important. So you're not just sitting here staring at charts 12 hours a day. That's fine. But I like to still have some normalcy in there. I like to be outside. Getting time away from screens, I think, is just as valuable as putting time in on the charts.
You mentioned the Globex session. Explain to us what that is.
So I think that's still like a slang term, an older terminology, whatever. But that would basically be the overnight session, the Asia session, London session. So 5 p.m. Central, when the futures markets reopen, is just kind of what I've always referred to it as. And it's a good time, in my opinion, to dissect the market. Or on Sundays, I typically would do a weekly prep session that starts on the Sunday open for Globex and, kind of help people kind of plan for their week, figure out some various levels, some spots, some perspective on where we may go as far as like the big four, ES, NQ, GC, and CL, which would usually be the ones I'm helping people kind of do some prep on. So that's typically when I like to organize myself because, like I said, some of my mornings can be completely just thrown up in the air. So for me, sometimes I like to do my next day planning as the overnight session opens, just so we can kind of see how there was anything going on after hours with earnings or other things that may have moved the market slightly. It's just a good way to have a perspective going into the next session.
Yeah, so we have the charts up. This is great. I want to kind of talk about your setup. You mentioned MGI also a couple minutes ago. So explain some of these words that you use and how they apply to your chart.
Yeah, MGI, going to be market generated information, which I think if you're a new trader, an old trader, it is still probably one of the most effective, simplistic indicators that you can just throw on a chart, however you want to read it, whether it's actually having something like you see on the right side with volume profile to just visually guide what's going on in the auction, or if you're someone like me that likes to have a lot of this stuff kind of auto-plotted for you, that's where the Order Flow Labs team has built some tools that can pretty much automate some of your weekly prep, your daily prep to make it super simple to figure out, where are we, where we may go, and where are areas that you may want to interact with. So as far as planning on where I may execute in the future on a shorter time frame chart, I like to use anywhere between a 30-minute and a 4-hour to kind of guide that. And I will plot various levels. For me, usually the weekly MGI, so things like the previous week's low, the week open, the previous week's value area high, value area low. And then on my shorter time frame charts, things like the previous session's value area high, value area low, just to help me understand, are we trading in balance? Are we trading inside of value area? Are we trading close to a point of control? Things that can keep me out of spots where I may get chopped up or we may reverse and head back towards a higher area of volume. Things like that, I think, are easy ways, even if you don't like to use a lot of indicators, just good ideas to have a perspective on, kind of where we're trading. And does it make sense potentially to find an entry in the spot? Or am I just in the middle of a short time frame value area where it's a literal coin flip and we could go either direction and it makes sense for me to get chopped up, stopped out on a short time frame trade because the market's at a decision point.
Okay, so when you use words like value area, we're talking about the volume profile. I can see the histogram bar on your screen right now. Those histogram bars move in real time, right? As trades happen, they get bigger. And that's a very important thing that you guys look at, right?
100%. It's one of the early concepts that I started to use of just a way to understand the auction in a simplistic way. Where are the most buyers and sellers? Where are there very few transactions transactions really taking place on the tape. And it's something that I like to use, like I said, to kind of guide, not necessarily a bias by any means, but help me find potential high probability entries, because we know most of the time the market's trading in balance. So you would see me take a lot of trades where maybe for some people it might look like I'm fading momentum, but no, I may be looking for a reversal to happen at something like a value area low versus a value area high, kind of like what we saw this morning where we filled the gap from the Sunday open. NQ had a very violent flush of last week's value area low, but then once in theory we came back above previous week's value area high and we filled the gap, you could feel pretty confident if you were seeing buyers on the tape to potentially just join along with them for that rotation back up towards any of these other MGI levels that kind of make sense, where we may rotate back into value for the moment from this week's tape. So something like that is a setup that I would typically take a lot of the time. And I think it's something that Leo and I were talking about yesterday at the close, where we were kind of teetering around the Sunday open and we were talking about this exact type of move where you could see that flush towards us potentially filling the Sunday gap. And then the market would probably make a decision. Are we going to fall back into the last few weeks of value here? All these candles that are sitting a little bit lower inside of 20,000. But it seems like for the moment, the market has made a decision that we are going to find higher prices and potentially be breaking out of this old range from the last few weeks. So I would take that relatively seriously, at least in the shorter term that we filled it. We're now building volume back above the Sunday open. So maybe I'd be looking for more dips to buy on this tape today rather than, trying to short this down for a new low down towards, 19,000s.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so for your volume profile that I'm looking at right now, how far are you looking back? You're not going back to like the beginning of the month or the beginning of the year.
No, it's not usually what I would use as far as like my executing for day trades and things like that. I usually am using possibly two. On my longer time frame charts, like 4 hour, I will usually use a visible range. So whatever I want to kind of adjust to based on what I'm looking at. So what candles are on the screen is a lot of the time what I'd like to populate a volume profile for. And then my execution is usually going to be a daily. And then because I have the previous week's value area high, value area low, a lot of the time that's more important to me to execute on than having the histogram kind of constantly update based on certain time frames. I like to execute based on those previous week ones and then what I'm seeing kind of more in real time, like today or the previous session.
Got it. And I'm not seeing moving averages. Maybe there's a couple lines there that are really subtle that I can't see, but walk us through the order of importance of the technicals on your chart.
So for me on execution, I have a few different charts that I look at, but for the most part, I like to keep things very clean, and volume is very important to me more than anything else, I would say. So the different types of VWAPs that you can throw on there, I typically on my execution chart will use like an RTH VWAP and like the 24-hour VWAP that'll just basically continue once we reopen at 5 o'clock Central for the overnight session, and then an RTH one that I usually use. And then what's cool about Leo's Metamorpho Labs' kind of anchored leg-to-leg profiles is the VWAP can adjust based on kind of those swing highs, swing lows that we may get intraday during the session. So a lot of the time I'm looking to have one anchored maybe from this like swing high that we had up here towards 20,200. So that may be kind of trailing here. So if I was joining along with this short potentially from today's high, it would just keep me honest as far as continuing to kind of follow that trend. So VWAP I probably use more than any, but then on like a more time-based chart, I like to throw on a 21 EMA on my 5-minute. It's more so less to give me trade entries and more to keep me honest. Am I following trend on whatever time frame I'm looking at? So for me, a 21 EMA on a 5-minute is a good day trade interpretation of the trend. Am I fading, in theory, the momentum during a specific part of that move is something that I just like to use. Like I said, not necessarily to enter off of, but I've found it can be a good way to kind of keep it under so that, if we break, in theory, that 21 EMA on that shorter time frame, we may be, just like you're seeing with kind of how the leg to leg on this delta profile here can shift, you may be seeing a change in the short-term trend that we're in on that shorter time frame. So I use it typically to kind of trail stops, but for the most part, I use a lot of VWAPs. You won't see a ton of EMAs or simple moving averages on my long time frame charts, like my 4-hour. I will use the 50, the 100, the 200 day. I think a lot of people use just to kind of guide that longer time frame momentum as well.
Yeah, no, it's funny. On a daily, I like to use the 8 EMA and the 21 EMA, and they're both fib numbers, right? It's like, all right, why 21? Well, it's a fib number. I like it.
It's the same thing. Like, I feel like a lot of people have slightly different flavors of the same concept, but they're used for, very similar things. So it was one of those where, as I was learning, it just 21 was a number that some mentors used. Some other people that I was trading with had success, at least just identifying a directional potential bias on that shorter time frame. So it's one of those I continue to use. And until in theory it doesn't work anymore, it's just something visually I like to have on some charts.
Yeah. All right, so tell us a little bit about the delta.
Delta by price here?
Yeah.
Basically, what this is obviously telling you is going to be during this like swing high or swing low. So in this case, this swing high from up here, this leg to leg that's kind of building, it's giving you that delta by price for this rotation back down here towards this anchored VWAP that I actually had from the swing low. So it's telling you that the buying and selling that's taking place basically on the tape here. So a lot of the time, I like to use it to identify ways on the tape where, for me, it really comes down to, how do I say this? Am I continuing to see that momentum continue to drive and build in this way of trend? So for me, I use it more on the full session at times as well. So I like to see that full delta histogram of kind of like you would see on the right with the whole session's volume profile. For me, I like to look at it a little more on ES to kind of guide potentially an entry or a larger time frame reoffer for the session, just because the leg to leg continues to build on the shorter time frame. But sometimes when I'm looking, you guys know this, I lately with higher volatility, I'm trading ES a little more. So for me, I like to use some of those large buyers. We've seen it recently where you're seeing those like 1,000 lots hit the tape. So for me, I like to see that continue to build throughout the session at various spots too, to kind of guide where like an iceberg order may be hitting the tape or a longer time frame buyer or seller continuing to step into this market.
Makes total sense. By the way, I'm like you. I freak out on the micro NASDAQ. I can't trade the micro NASDAQ. ES is my go-to. You have 60 handle candles up and down routinely, and I freak out. I can't handle it. So we'll stick with even the S&P for me.
Yeah, it's funny. During times of higher volatility, I lean towards it. It just respects certain levels a little more. I don't know. I trade both. There's days I say that, and then I'm still like in a 3-lot mini NQ trade. So it just really depends.
Yeah, I got it. Have you journeyed into other commodity? You mentioned crude oil earlier.
Yep. Every once in a while, it's the same thing. It's a mood thing. But yeah, every once in a while, I do dabble in some of the other commodities. For example, I did actually win a contest to trade lean hogs and won a cowboy hat. I think there is value in learning or at least watching some of the other instruments that are out there, especially because you'll have days where there's a better market to potentially be in because something like ES is consolidating maybe a 10 to 20 point range. But for the most part, gold could be moving. Crude could be very much in a session at the very least. So there's better markets there. So one of my goals for this year is to try to not necessarily focus on other instruments, other products, but watch them more, basing it by the same, I would say, things that I look for, execute based on, seeing if there's an opportunity in another market when things are consolidating or if nothing's really happening. Sometimes it's fun just to throw on something you don't necessarily know a ton about and just see, are you really a trader? Can you look at a blank chart in theory, something that you don't watch every day and just be executing by what you're seeing in real time? I think there's value there. That's why the micro products can be great too, even if you're throwing on one micro crude, if you've never traded crude oil, there's just that opportunity to get some exposure, play around with it and just see how it moves and see if you like it too.
Yeah, that's why the micros are great for sure. You could experiment. Going back to this chart though, so right now we're entering the European sessions, well, because of the time difference, maybe not. About to end, I think. Getting ready for your next trading segment, whether it's power hour or not. What's your takeaway from this chart right now? Would you analyze this like right now saying, okay, I'm mentally prepared for later on after lunch. I'm going to get back involved here. And here's what I'm hoping to see based on the pattern that we see so far and based on the volume profile?
So us coming down here towards the opening range from early parts of the session, as well as the point of control from today, I would be looking to see, do buyers basically defend the previous day low? Can we bounce in NQ anywhere here in this 70 area down towards kind of the 40s? Do we see buyers continuing to step in? And right now, based on the delta flip that just fired and some of this positive delta we're seeing here, it looks like they're trying at the very least to defend this spot for that continuation, maybe back up towards the initial balance high. So that's one way to look at it. The other way you could see this is we had that decent move back up, but now we're failing inside the initial balance inside of the previous day close. So is this a kind of failed breakout to kind of defend the downside that we saw yesterday? And now are we going to rotate all the way back down towards initial balance low? So I would say looking at this, where we're trading right now, there is potentially an opportunity to long this somewhere in the next 30 points on NQ. Would I necessarily take it? No, because to me, this kind of looks like we did just fail. We went up towards last week's high. You couldn't really find buyers up there. And now we're falling back into the latter half of the overnight sessions range and into the early parts of today's opening range. So I would kind of look at this like it's a 50-50 type spot for me. I would probably be hands off, just kind of waiting to see what happens next, just because I'm a little worried. Are we going to get more continuation and maybe go retest that gap fill, that week open from Sunday as well?
Yeah. Okay. So the pending gap is still on your radar screen.
It is, just because, like I said, us failing at last week's high and now falling back in the range just makes me think, was the early part of this week just we really couldn't find any new buyers? And in fact, on the longer time frame, did we find those larger sellers step in towards yesterday and are now we're waiting for a good opportunity to reoffer a bit higher? I mean, did we retrace almost half back, I think, on the NASDAQ? The tariffs and everything next week on deck. I think we have PCE tomorrow. You just have, I guess, not reasons to potentially find some lower prices, but nothing that makes me want to jump in and long prior to those just yet. So, but that's on a longer time frame. On the day trade perspective, let's see what happens here at the previous day low.
Totally makes sense. Totally makes sense. All right, man. Well, listen, I appreciate you sharing a little bit of the secret sauce with us.
Good to be here, man. I appreciate it.
This presentation is for educational purposes only. All of the symbols, trading ideas, and live trading are for demonstrational purposes and are not recommendations or trading advice. Past performance may not be indicative of future results. All of the information and opinions expressed by third-party guests are their own and are not necessarily those of NinjaTrader, LLC. Trading futures involves substantial risk and may not be suitable for everyone, and trading futures can result in losses greater than the initial required margin. Traders should only trade futures with risk capital. Risk capital is money that you can afford to lose without jeopardizing your financial security or current lifestyle. You can find additional disclosure information on the NinjaTrader website.